Welcome to That Boxing Writers Podcast, the weekly podcast show about boxing. I'm That Boxing Writer, Jeremy Harridges, and let's start the show. Hello, fight fans. I'm That Boxing Writer, and welcome to episode 7 of That Boxing Writers Podcast. Make sure that you guys are liking or subscribing, depending on how you are getting this podcast. Just remember that we are available both on, what are we on? Spotify, iTunes, of course, my YouTube channel, and pretty much anywhere that podcasts are available. Tell your friends, get everybody on board. I'm really having a good time with this and hope you're enjoying the shows as well. Special thank you guys for your response to episode 6. The views were through the roof. Almost we're closing in on 1,000 views on YouTube, lots of downloads, and again, had some excellent guests for that episode. 2 guys that I'm very close with, my friend Sean Zattel, and of course, Dan Canobio from CompuBox. Look forward to having them on again. And yeah, it was just one of those special episodes where everything just clicked, just talking with some buddies about what's going on in boxing. And we're on a bit of a down period right now for what's going on in the world of boxing. Taking a look at the fight schedule, there's a lot of good stuff coming up, just not right away. We have to wait a little bit for some of the bigger fights that are about to transpire. But overall, October is looking like a monster month for boxing. Incredible bouts that are taking place. Really excited about them. Hopefully, we'll get to travel for a few. And of course, you've got November as well, which is going to culminate in the bout between Caleb Plant and Canelo Alvarez. Hoping to be at that one, and as well, I'll probably be traveling to the Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury 3 bout as well. I'll keep you guys posted on that, and hopefully you'll have some excellent content coming your way once we get closer to that fight date. Still trying to see what's going down with it. Unfortunately, last weekend, not that great when it comes to the boxing world. We had several letdowns, fights that were either canceled or just not very good. You had the September 11th Triller Fight Club bout between Evander Holyfield and Vitor Belfort, and it was a truly horrible card. I don't know if you guys shelled out the money for it. I did. I was doing the live commentary for fansided.com/boxing, and I was doing the play-by-play. I was doing the full live updates for the bouts. I don't want to belittle the solid opening bout between Andy Vences and Jono Carroll. Jono Carroll won that bout. That was a great competitive bout. Very good matchmaking for that fight. And then it quickly just went off the rails. Let's put it that way. Looking at the fight, I mean, they all ended up being exhibitions minus Anderson Silva versus Tito Ortiz. That one turned into, apparently it's going to count on the records according to BoxRec. But other than that, I mean, David Haye versus Joe Fournier. David Haye was just throwing jabs, taking it very easy on his friend. Just the way that it was marketed and sold as, hey, these are legit bouts. And by the way, just kidding, many of them are just going to be exhibitions. And here's 2 guys that are just really friends, just messing around in the ring. It left boxing fans with a very bad taste in their mouths. And let's not pretend like it's not boxing fans that are primarily consuming this. That's who's going to buy a boxing bout. Doesn't matter if you have some great former champions on the card. People aren't going to buy it just because you have Evander Holyfield on the card. It's going to be boxing people that are buying it. I mean, there wasn't even a social media star on this one. So you can't even say that we're going to pull from an alternate source of fans. If you're going to be in the business of boxing, you have to appeal to boxing fans. And somewhere along the way, Triller just absolutely fell off of their agenda here. And it's just coming off terribly. That first bout that they had between Tyson and Roy Jones Jr., I thought was done excellently. I thought that they did a great job of marketing that, did a great job of structuring it. It was produced well. It was classy. I talk about this in my After the Fight column. If you haven't read it yet, go to fansided.com/boxing after the fight. And the headline for me was Triller is trashing boxing, and I think it's true. And there was a visceral reaction to that fight. You saw it with people in the media afterwards talking about it. You saw fans tweeting about it. Nobody was happy with it. It was a true travesty. Having Evander Holyfield at the age of 58 in the boxing ring with Vitor Belfort, it shouldn't have happened. Yes, he has a right to do what he wants, but there have to be safeguards in place to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And ultimately, he was embarrassed. Yeah, he got a lot of money, but it was a really sad thing to watch. It wasn't entertaining. It was sad, and nobody wants to see that. It's different if you put him in there against someone like Mike Tyson, and again, you have it billed as an exhibition. But putting him in there against a guy that was, 14 years his junior and was really going out there to knock his head off, it was just a really disingenuous way to treat a former champion and a former great. I thought that they did Evander Holyfield dirty. I'm not interested in seeing those types of fights. And I and a lot of other people are fed up with Triller Fight Club after what they did. Is the Cambosos Lopez fight going to be good? I like both Lopez and Cambosos, and I want to see it. Have they handled it in a terrible way, moving it every 10 seconds and now putting it on a Monday? I think it's awful that they did that. And I think they squandered a great opportunity, and they continue to do that. Now, let's look at the fallout of that. Shortly after that fight, you have a freelance PR company that was working with Triller say, we're no longer working with them, effective immediately. Print that. Obviously, they're not happy about something, either about the legitimacy of the bouts, or the way that they're being treated, or is there non-payment? I don't know, but it's not going well. They weren't appreciative of that. So that was the first shoe to drop. And then NY Fights, as far as I can tell, was the first to report that Peter Khan, boxing manager and someone that was heading up things for Triller on the boxing end, he's out. He's resigned from his position with Triller Fight Club, and they haven't reported why that is, but I can pretty much guess that he's probably not happy with the way things are going. Peter Khan is a really good boxing mind, has had a number of champions in his stable, including Teofimo Lopez and Xander Zayas and a bunch of great fighters. He's a very good boxing manager, a very good boxing mind. For him to exit and to resign tells me that he doesn't appreciate what Triller's doing. He didn't sign on for a freak show, which is what Triller's becoming. It's really bad news for Triller when the one really legit boxing mind that they had behind everything has stepped out on them. And I think that speaks volumes of where this Triller thing is going. Can Triller right the ship? It's possible. Are they going to? I would say no. I don't see them writing anything. I had a conversation with Ryan Kavanaugh before, just days before the event. And, he was a pleasant guy to talk to. He gave intelligent answers, but at the same time, he didn't want to give full answers. He didn't want to talk about Donald Trump. Triller didn't want to talk about Donald Trump. And you can't sign a guy to do commentary and then pretend that he doesn't exist. It just shows that, listen, you're trying to get attention and you're doing it in a cheap way. You're inviting people that bring sensational headlines, but now we're seeing that not all press is good press. They've gotten a lot of awful press, and their brand is dying off. The only way that they can salvage it is by putting on cards that are legitimate. If you're going to have these social media bouts or these former great exhibition bouts, then you have to do it in an even, fair way. That's not ludicrous. That's the only way that this thing's going to work, and do it in a way that's classy. Doing it the Pete Davidson way, where you have people, just cursing in order to curse and trashing the product, isn't going to work. It never made sense to me. I mean, really, the Jake Paul versus Ben Askren fight was the first sign to me that things have gone terribly wrong for Triller. So of course they can go back to the drawing board, see what they did right their first time around, and try to salvage it. And they have the Triller versus money and things of that nature. But right now, they're not making anybody happy. And I'm sure the numbers aren't reflecting positively on them for the product that they're putting out, which is trash. So we'll see what happens with Triller if they wake up and decide to do something right. Go back to where you started. Go back to the Tyson Jones study it for what worked, and please stop doing these terrible cards that aren't working because no one's liking them and no one wants to watch them. I don't want to cover them. But anyway, that's that. Um, New bouts. Let's talk about the good for a second. Terence Crawford versus Shawn Porter didn't have to go to purse bid. There's a deal in place. It's rumored that they're going to be fighting on November 20th. That's a good bout. I'll have another video later talking about that one a little bit more in depth. Still early. I got to do film study on both to really give a definitive prediction. But this is Terence Crawford's toughest opponent ever. Shawn Porter is going to give him a run for his money. Shawn Porter is going to bring his A game, and it's going to be interesting to see how Terence Crawford responds. That's a good fight. Then you've also got Dillian White versus Otto Wallen. Otto Wallen, a friend to the show, was one of my first guests on the podcast. So I'm trying not to be biased here. And I'll do another video taking a look at that one. So that'll be up on my YouTube channel in the coming days. I'll kind of do a back-to-back preliminary prediction for each of those. But that's also a good bout. Yeah, Dillian White's got power, but he's got a suspect job. He's got definite holes in his boxing ability. Not saying that he's not one of the best boxers out there, but like everybody's vulnerable. Doesn't matter if you're the best or whatever. And I think Otto Wallen is a more solid boxer. Does he lack the power of a Dillian White? Sure. But if he can go 12 rounds, I think he can give Dillian White a run for his. Let's remember, Otto Wallen went the distance and had Tyson Fury, that the fighter that we call the best heavyweight in the world, a run for his money. Almost had him out of there at one point. Yes, by a cut, but he stayed with him. If you can hang with Tyson Fury, you can beat Dillian White. So that is not a mismatch. That is a legit fight. I think Dillian White doesn't know what he's in for in this one. So I'm excited to see that. But now let's get to the emphasis of the show. I have got a double interview with former boxer Peter Buckley and writer Chris Akers. They teamed up together, and there is this book that's out, King of the Journeymen, The Life of Peter Buckley. I will be reviewing that for fansided.com/boxing sometime in the near future. I'm making my way through it right now. I'm really, really, really liking it. It's a fascinating story. Now, when I have boxers on, you guys like big names and the guys that are at the top of the top. Otto Wallen, hey, he's one of the top heavyweights in the world, one of my guests and a lot of other people. But I like having, what I like about boxing is that boxers have such fascinating stories. And rather than having one of the most winningest fighters in history on the show, I've got one of the biggest losers in boxing on the show. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, just looking at his record, I think he's got the second most losses in boxing history in terms of the court recorded boxing history. Peter Buckley, his record was 32, 256, and 12 with 8 KOs. He's got 256 losses. Now, a lot of people look at that and they just dismiss him as a bum, which you should never call a fighter, a tin can. Anyone that is willing to go into the ring 300 times to fight, to put in work, to take the punches, you got to give them respect. The whole premise of the book is that he's king of the journeyman. And what I got from this in my talk with them is that we shouldn't use the term journeyman as a derogatory term. We should use it as a badge of honor. And even though Peter Buckley has the second most losses in boxing history, has 300 fights under his belt, there's something to be said about that distinction and that honor that, hey, he went in there no matter what, even if the deck was loaded against him, and he was still willing to fight because he loved it. These guys don't get paid a whole lot of money. He did it because he loved it. And I think there's something special and unique. I mean, think about how many guys would stop after a couple losses. This guy's got 256 of them. So when I sat down with Chris and Peter Buckley, I kind of wanted to get, hey, what's the focus of this piece? What do you want people to take away from it? And what I'm taking away from it is that the term journeyman shouldn't be a put down. It should be something that describes someone with a lot of heart. And Peter's got a fascinating story. I mean, there's prison, There's I don't want to say too much. I want you guys to check out the interview, and I want you guys to buy the book. Look for it, Amazon.com. That's where obviously everything's sold on Amazon, but definitely go there. It's Pitch Publishing, King of the Journeyman, The Life of Peter Buckley. This is my conversation with the Peter Buckley and the writer Chris Akers. Ooh, also throw in that Peter Buckley fought guys like Naseem Hamed, Acelino Freitas, Gavin Reese, Lee Selby, Kell Brook. He fought from 1989 to 2008. That Peter Buckley. So this is my talk with boxer Peter Buckley, writer Chris Akers, and I present my conversation to you guys. Chris, Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really fascinated with the process of how this all came together. I guess I'll start with Peter. How did you get approached about doing an autobiography about your story?
Well, over the years, I've had a few people approach me, and there was a man called Mark Turner. He'd done a book called Journeyman. He kept getting in touch with me, but he wanted me to do a chapter in his book, but I was more than a chapter in the book, I thought. So me and Chris met up for a mutual first person on Facebook, and we just met up a few times and started talking, and that's how the book came about.
Chris, as far as your knowledge of boxing, was it something that you were always interested in? And then what were your first thoughts when you were approached with Peter's story?
Well, I've been a boxing fan since I was 8 years old. So when I was approached with Peter's story, I thought that was fascinating, because most boxing books tend to be about the glamours, like the world and title holders and the like, and you don't get to hear about the people who are basically there to just help like prospects build up their records, help them to learn. And obviously I'd heard of Pete as well. We're obviously from the same hometown, and I'd heard about his 300 fights, etc., etc. But I was really interested in his story. So when I was approached to do his book, it was a dream come true for me, really. And it was just a really nice process throughout.
Peter, about your life and about your career, when you get started with it, obviously no one knows how good or where they can take their career. What was your influence for starting boxing, and what were your intentions when you got going in the sport?
Well, I started boxing when I was 10 years of age. As a young kid, my brother done it. A lot of lads on the street done it round by me. We went to a local club. And I was a really good amateur boxer. I had 54 fights, lost 4. And then I got to the national finals when I was 15, lost in the national finals of Great Britain. And then I just went off the rails. I was in trouble a lot in that of youth offenders. And it was only when I got to the age of 20, when I just got out of prison again, that I met a local pro round by me, and he just asked me, did I want to go training one day? And I said, yeah. I was in the pub with him. And the next day he knocked round my house, and I just started going over the gym, and I was just doing it to keep out of trouble, basically. I didn't really have no aspirations to win titles at the time. It was just something to do, really, keep me out of trouble.
I know that, you start off your career, you put together a string of wins, and then some losses start coming. Did you ever lose confidence in yourself, and what kind of kept you going, win, lose, or draw?
Well, look, I just love fighting, basically, and a lot of the decisions I was losing against was hometown decisions in other kids' backyards by half a point margin or a point, and you just got to be thick-skinned and carry on with it. I won 2 Midland titles, fought for a WBA Intercontinental title abroad, so I was good enough to compete at that level. But I was always the away fight. I'm not saying I won all these fights when I lost them, but there was a lot of decisions that should have gone my way that didn't, and I just carried on with it.
For you, Chris, when you get the story and you start talking to Peter, even before you start talking, what were some of the assumptions maybe that you had about Peter and his career, and what were some of the surprises that you came across as you interviewed him?
Well, before I interviewed him, I did a lot of research because I knew about his record, but I didn't know too much about his personal life. And the funny thing is, even though I think it's an incredible story, I wasn't surprised at all. Boxing is one of those sports where there's characters from, yes, especially decades ago, to low rungs of life, but the stories are so fascinating and so varied that nothing surprises me anymore about boxers and what they got up to both in the ring and out the ring. So there's nothing there that, even if I heard it from the first time from Pete, that really shocks me, to be honest.
And Peter, for you, when people talk about 300 fights, I mean, did you ever think that you would have 300 fights going into this career?
No, never. Look, so I never set a goal of how many fights I was going to have, but when I got to 100 fights, I was still fresh. I mean, my 100th fight, I boxed a former British champion who a day's notice, went up to Scotland, lost by a point. And people said to me, "Oh, are you retiring now?" I was like, "No, I'm just getting started." Do you know what I mean? It's like, look, say then 5 years out of the ring when I was a kid, it kept me fresh. It took me a long time to get back into the swing of boxing. And I gradually just, look, say when I had 100 fights, then I had 150. I got a draw on my 150th fight, which I won, really, put the kid down and that. And I just carried on. And it was only when I got to about 250 fights, just after that, I didn't set myself a goal to have 300 fights, but when I got to 292 fights, I literally packed boxing in because my gym had closed. And I happened to go to a boxing shop in Scotland, and the promoter I'd worked for many times just put the idea in me. Basically, he said, you should have had another 8 fights, and had 300. So that's what I've done. I just met with not a manager, it wasn't a boxing manager of mine. It was a friend I knew who was a manager, but he wasn't my manager. And I just said to him, "Can you match me up for my next 8 fights to have 300? He was like, "Yeah, no problem." And that was my goal then when I got to 292, to have 300 and then retire.
You've had again, that number 300 is quite incredible. Out of all those 300 fights, is there one that you look back at was the most memorable?
Well, when I fought for a WBA Intercontinental title fight abroad against Austria, against unbeaten fighter called Harold Gear, I was really fit for it. I was really up for the fight, and I had him over in the 9th round, beat him up the last 3 rounds. He got the decision. I'm not saying it was a hometown decision, but if it would have been in my country, it might have been a bit closer. But he went on to fight for a world title, and he got beat in a round. He actually got knocked out in the quickest time, 17 seconds. And if I would have fought for that title, I'm not saying I would have won it, but I wouldn't have got knocked out in 17 seconds. I can bet your house on that.
I mean, you've been in some in the ring with some incredible names. Out of all the different fighters you've seen, who would you say was the most talented boxer that you ever saw or faced in the ring?
Oh, without a doubt, Duke McKenzie. He was a IBF super flyweight champion. He won the super bantamweight title, the bantamweight title as well. He was a freeweight division holder. And I always say, when I boxed Duke McKenzie, you see, I wasn't a journeyman as such. I still had ambitions. I actually went down there with the intention to win the fight. And I got a rude awakening because he was a completely different level from me, a different level I'd ever boxed. And that's when probably it made me into a journeyman, because I knew I was never going to reach them heights. Not that I thought I was, but I was good enough to fight European champions, British champions. I mean, someone done a thing the other day and they said I boxed over 70 champions, over 20 world champions. So, I mixed with some good company.
Chris, question for you. So, you've done your research, you've heard and probably watched fights with Peter in them. What's the process? How do you get started with Peter in kind of putting his story together, and what's the process look like between the two of you?
Well, the first thing I asked him to do was I've done an hour-long chat with him, which just basically tell me about your life, just skimming through it from when he was young to the time he was boxing as amateur to the time he was in prison and beyond that. And so that gives me a guide as to where to go in regards to the chapters and where to dig a little bit deeper. And then from there, we'd meet up nearly every weekend in a cafe. I'd have the tape recorder on, and I would just ask him questions about various aspects of his life. So one week it could be about the time he was in prison, the next week it could be his amateur career, next week it could be what he did immediately after he came out of prison for the last time. So that's how the process works. And we went like that for nearly a couple of years, well, 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
And the only thing that changed with that was obviously the pandemic, because we couldn't meet up anymore. So But by then I got a lot of dialogue they had, so it's just a case of phoning him and recording that instead. So that's in a nutshell what the process was like.
I know you two are both busy, so I won't take up too much more of your time. But for Peter, the term journeyman, I know a lot of people when they use it in a kind of derisive put down. But really, it seems like with this book, the term journeyman, it's a tribute to your longevity in the sport, and I think really comes off as a badge of honor. Would you say that's a correct way to look at the term?
Yeah, definitely would. Yeah, because like I say, there's journeymen and there's journeymen. I was the king of the journeymen because I never went in there and fell over. I got stopped legitimately 5 times in my career, all against world-class opponents and at short notice. And I'm proud of what I've done. I mean, I had 300 fights. I've still got all my faculties right, and you'll never be able to take that away from me. And I'm proud of what I've done.
And now for Chris, taking that term journeyman, I mean, it's in the title of the book, King of the Journeymen, the Peter Buckley story. How do you as a writer kind of get the reader to kind of transform the meaning of the word journeyman, or is it really just in showing them the career and life of Peter?
Partly it's the latter, so because he had such a fascinating life anyway. But in regards to journeyman, what I think the book does very well, it shows how someone like a journeyman like Peter was, how he's used as a way of testing prospects. The fact that they don't just fall over, the fact that they teach these prospects new tricks of the trade, the fact that they can get to just getting to 300 fights is an achievement in itself. To do it the way Peter's done it, in a way that he's fighting the likes of Duke McKenzie, Peter Naseem Hamed twice, Acelino Freitas, all these different boxers, to do that, I think it's just incredible. Journeymen aren't just there as like cannon fodder. You do learn something from journeymen. Great example, bit off subject, but Darnell Boone, he fought both in Kovalev and Andre Ward early in their careers, gave them really tough fights, and yet people might cast them as journeymen, but look what they learned from their fights and how it progressed. So to me, a journeyman isn't someone that's just cannon fodder. It's someone that's like a jack of all trades, who might not be a level of a world champion, but he'll do enough at the beginning of a prospect's career to really test them and help them grow and develop.
And final question, I think you said that really well, by the way, Chris. And I'm going to ask this to both of you, but I'm going to start with Peter. After someone reads this book, what's maybe 1 or 2 things that you hope that they take away from it, or 1 or 2 things that maybe someone learns from your story?
Well, we do get the short end of the deal as away fighters. That a journeyman has got to be fit all year round. I've had phone calls an hour to go and will I go and fight someone, and I've said yeah. I've never said no to a fight, and we are better than our record looks. If I had plenty of notice for fights, when I had notice for fights, I always performed very good and won. So we do get the short straw from the referees as well. So there is 2 sides to boxing. You can't all be champions. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well said. And I think, I'm really interested to read the book and kind of get that insight. Same question to you, Chris. Putting the words on the page, what are maybe some of the 1 or 2 things that you hope that an audience can take away from this book?
Well, partly to reiterate what Peter said as well, but also from my perspective, 1, it's a redemption story, because this is a person who had a very good amateur career, had a 5-year stint in prison, and then still developed their life and is now just living a very good life because of that. But also, one thing you have to take into account is Peter started career in the late 80s when he still had same-day weigh-ins, and retired in 2008, I believe. So he's just seen everything in boxing, like behind the scenes, in terms of how boxers lose weight, all of the shenanigans that went on behind. So that's another thing which I hope readers take into account, is how the business of boxing has changed and how it has developed as the years have gone on.
It's fascinating to hear it. I can't wait to dig into it. The book is called King of the Journeymen, the Peter Buckley Story. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thank you
very much.
Whoa. Not the typical boxing story, not the typical boxer that I have on the show, but someone that deserves your attention, someone whose story is fascinating. Pick up the book, King of the Journeymen, The Life of Peter Buckley, and check it out. Like I said, sometime in the next week or two, you should see my book review popping up on fansided.com/boxing. But definitely check it out. I'll have the book linked if you're watching this on YouTube. For those of you that are listening to the podcast, make sure that you check out my YouTube channel, That Boxing Writer. That's all you have to search for, and it'll pop right up. And you can find the link on the video for episode 7. Again, it's a fascinating story. And I think that Peter gave me an education, and Chris as well, for what people can take away from the story and how even a loser is a winner. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys keep checking out the pod, keep coming back, keep looking for more. Check out my work on fansided.com/boxing. Find me on Twitter. Give me a shout at A Boxing Writer on Twitter and That Boxing Writer on Instagram. And of course, That Boxing Writer on YouTube. So that's what I got for this week. I'll have some more stuff for you in the coming weeks. The podcast keeps rolling on, and thank you again for all of your support. I'm excited, guys. Let's keep it going. I'll see you next time.